Amelia Moore pulled 3 gnarled tubers from the toxic marsh water, their purple-black skin still dripping with corrosive residue, and announced they'd be lunch. The 3 Vex'kari cubs, each designed by millions of years of evolution to consume raw meat exclusively, stopped their distressed keening and watched with preternatural focus. Commander Kael'thas watched with the dawning certainty that the human had lost her mind. "Step away from my charges," he said, his translator rendering his growl into flat standard. "Those are flagged lethal in the planetary database." Amelia didn't even look up. She was already scraping the tubers with her survival knife, peeling away the outer layer to reveal pale flesh beneath. "Everything on this planet is flagged lethal. That's why it's quarantined." She glanced at the cubs, who had crept closer despite Kael'thas's presence. "You 3 want to help rinse these?" The cubs looked at each other, then at Kael'thas, then back at the human who was casually handling poison and smiling at them like she was offering treats. Xelax, the eldest at roughly 6 human years equivalent, made the decision for all of them. He padded forward on massive paws, each claw capable of piercing combat armor, and gently took a tuber in his mouth. "Xelax, no." Kael'thas lunged forward, but the cub was already carrying the root to the water's edge, copying the human's rinsing motion with careful dips and shakes. His sister Azila chirped excitedly and grabbed another tuber. The youngest, Hill, looked torn between obedience to his commander and the fascinating activity his siblings had joined. "They're obligate carnivores," Kael'thas said, his voice rising. "Their digestive systems cannot process plant matter. This will kill them." "Uh-huh." Amelia accepted the rinsed tuber from Xelax with a cheerful "good job" and began slicing it into chunks. "What time did we crash?" The non sequitur threw him. 19 hours ago. Why does that? And when did you last feed them?" Kael'thas felt his secondary heart skip. 23 hours ago, the morning meal before the transport departed. "Right. So they're already overdue for food by what, 4 hours based on their age and activity level?" She didn't wait for confirmation. "And all your protein rations were in the cargo bay that's now a crater. No intact emergency supplies, no functioning synthesizers, and rescue is, what did you say, 4 to 6 days out depending on ion storm conditions? Which is why we must ration the remaining." "There are no remaining rations, Commander. I watched you inventory. You found 3 protein bars, 2 of which are contaminated with fuel residue, and 1 nutrient pack that's designed for your adult metabolism, not growing cubs." She dropped tuber chunks into the pot of boiling water she'd set up over a chemical heat source. "So, your options are, let them starve for 5 days, or let me feed them. You're offering poison?" "I'm offering calories." Amelia stirred the pot, and the sharp, mineral scent of cooking tuber filled the air. "Sit down, Commander. You're making the cubs nervous." He realized she was right. All 3 cubs had positioned themselves between him and the human, their haunches tense, ears flat. They were protecting her. From him. Kael'thas sat down hard on a piece of wreckage. The Vex'kari were apex predators on a death world classified as severe. Their cubs trained for hunting from the moment they could walk. They obeyed pack hierarchy, absolutely. They had never, in 12,000 years of recorded history, exhibited protective behavior toward prey species. And yet, here were 3 cubs, none yet old enough for their first solo hunt, positioned in defensive formation around a soft-skinned human who masked perhaps a third of what they did. "How long does it take for plant toxicity to manifest in Vex'kari young?" Amelia asked, still stirring. "Genuine question. I only have limited xenobiology training." "Between 6 and 8 hours for most alkaloids. he said numbly. Faster for some compounds. Okay, good to know. We've got time then. She tested a piece of tuber with her knife tip. These need about 40 minutes. The boiling breaks down the primary toxins, their heat label, see, and leaches out the secondary compounds into the water, which we'll discard. She looked at the cubs, who were watching the pot with intense focus. You three are probably thirsty. There's clean water in the supply container. The blue one, see it? Azila bounded over to the container and started lapping a water with her broad, serrated tongue. That container is for... Kael'thas stopped. For what? Rationing water that would run out in 2 days? The planet had water everywhere, all of it tainted with minerals and organic compounds that would sicken a Vex'kari in hours. Except the human had been drinking it since the crash. She'd boiled it, done something with a small filtration device, and pronounced it drinkable, if not exactly tasty. Let me guess, Amelia said, not unkindly. This was supposed to be a simple transport run. Drop the cubs at the military academy on Vex'kari Prime, standard procedure. Instead, ion storm, navigation failure. Crash landing on a quarantine world, and now you're stuck with 3 hungry cubs and a human botanist who won't follow protocols. How did you? You keep trying to quote regulations at me. That's either military training or severe anxiety disorder. And you don't strike me as the anxious type. She smiled, and there was something deeply competent in that expression. I'm not trying to undermine you, Commander. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to poison children? My job is to identify edible food sources in extreme environments. She pulled a battered datapad from her jacket. Field botanist, Colonial Survey Corps. I've spent the last 8 years figuring out what humans can safely eat on 73 different worlds, 40 of which were classified as hostile or lethal to human biology. She gestured at the pot. This is literally what I do. Find food where the database says there isn't any. Kael'thas stared at her. You're a professional forager. Fancy way to put it, but yeah. She checked the tubers again. These are almost done. Zilax, can you get me those flat containers from my pack? The green pack, not the damaged one. The cub immediately moved to obey, and Kael'thas realized with a start that the human had learned their names, had been using them consistently. In the chaos of the crash and the grim inventory of their survival odds, he'd been thinking of them as the cubs, as charges to be protected until proper guardians could be assigned. The human had been treating them as people. Zilax returned with 3 shallow containers balanced carefully in his jaws. Amelia took them with another good job and began draining the tubers, pouring the toxic water well away from their camp. The remaining chunks she divided between the 3 containers, then added clean water to each. Let it cool for 5 minutes, she said. I know you're hungry, but hot food burns mouths whether you're human or Vex'kari. Rahil, the youngest, whined softly. Amelia made a sympathetic sound and sat down on the ground at their level. I know, buddy. Waiting is hard. Want me to tell you about these while we wait? She held up one of the tubers. These grow in the marsh because the toxins in the water don't hurt them. They actually absorb some of the bad stuff and transform it into something else, like little chemical factories. Azila tilted her head, making an inquiring chirp. Right, you're wondering how that helps you eat them. Amelia's eyes lit up with the particular enthusiasm of someone discussing their specialty. See, the heat breaks down the first set of toxins. Those are the ones that would make you sick right away. Then, soaking them in clean water pulls out the secondary compounds. What's left is basically pure carbohydrate with some trace proteins and minerals. She looked at Kael'thas. Not nutritionally complete, obviously. We'll need to supplement with other sources. But it's calories, and calories keep you alive while we figure out the rest. They're carnivores, he repeated, but there was less certainty in his voice. They're cubs who need food. She tested the temperature of the tubers and nodded. Okay, these are ready. Start slow, just a little piece. See how your stomachs handle it. The cubs looked at the containers, then at the human. Then, in defiance of every instinct their species had evolved, they began to eat vegetation. Kael'thas accessed his bioscanner with numb fingers and trained it on the cubs. Their vitals appeared on his display, elevated heart rates from hunger, slightly depressed immune markers from stress, but otherwise stable. He set the scanner to continuous monitoring and alarm mode. When the toxins hit their systems, he'd know immediately. He'd be ready to provide whatever emergency medical intervention he could with their surviving supplies. The cubs ate carefully, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Xelax finished his portion and looked hopefully at the pot where the human was preparing another batch. You can have more in an hour, Amelia said firmly. New food means slow introduction. Trust me, your stomach will thank me later. 8 hours, Kael'thas remembered. Toxicity manifests in 6 to 8 hours. He'd have to watch these cubs sicken and die because he couldn't stop a human from feeding them poison. He activated his emergency beacon again, knowing it was futile. The signal barely penetrated the planet's ionosphere, and the rescue ship wouldn't arrive any faster, no matter how many times he called. Commander? Amelia was looking at him with unexpected sympathy. I know this goes against your training. Everything in your medical database is telling you this is wrong. But I need you to trust me, just for the next few days. Can you do that? Do I have a choice? Sure. You can pull rank, order me to stop me, maybe even physically restrain me. She glanced at the cubs, who were now grooming each other contentedly, their stomachs no longer desperately empty. But then what? Wait for them to starve while following protocols that don't account for this situation? He wanted to argue, wanted to cite regulations, proper procedures, the entire structure of rules that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments and 2 deep space emergencies. Instead, he said, if they show any signs of distress, you'll be the first to know. I'm not trying to hurt them, Commander. I'm trying to keep them alive. She started preparing another batch of tubers, her movements practiced and efficient. Now, while those cook, want to help me identify which other plants around here might be useful? I'm good, but I'm better with a second set of eyes, and your species has excellent distance vision. Despite himself, Kael'thas found himself describing the local flora he'd observed during his security perimeter checks. The human listened intently, occasionally asking questions about color variations or growth patterns he'd noticed. By the time the second meal was ready, Azila had requested more food with insistent chirping. Kael'thas realized the human had quietly recruited him as an assistant forager. The cubs ate their second small portions and immediately curled up together for a nap, their bellies full for the first time in over 30 hours. Kael'thas checked his bioscanner again. Still stable. No signs of toxicity. 4 more hours until the standard manifestation window. 4 hours to prove the human wrong, or prove every Vex'kari nutritionist for the last 6 centuries wrong instead. They'll be hungry again when they wake up, Amelia said quietly. Growing cubs always are. I'll need to gather more tubers, and I spotted some other plants that might work. The ones with the red stems near the rocky area? Those have thorns. Good thing I have gloves. She stood and stretched. You coming? I promise I won't make you eat any vegetables, Commander. It was such an absurd thing to say, so casual in the face of potential catastrophe, that Kael'thas found himself making a sound that might have been a laugh if the Vex'kari possessed that physiological capability. Someone needs to ensure you don't accidentally poison yourself, he said. There we go. That's the spirit. Amelia shouldered her collection bag. Come on, let's see what else this lethal hellscape has to offer. They left the cubs sleeping peacefully by the fire, their biosigns steady on Kael'thas's scanner, and went to gather more impossible food from a world that wasn't supposed to sustain them at all. The bioscanner alarm didn't sound at 6 hours, or 8. By hour 12, Kael'thas had recalibrated the device twice, certain it was malfunctioning. The cubs were playing, not just moving around, actually playing. Xilax was teaching his siblings a stalking game, creeping through the wreckage with exaggerated care while Hill tried to ambush him. Azila had appointed herself referee and was chirping corrections when either brother broke the rules. Your scanner working okay? Amelia asked, returning from another foraging expedition with her bag bulging. It indicates they're in perfect health. Good to hear. She dumped her collection on a flat piece of hull plating and began sorting. Found something interesting. These bulbs here? They're almost pure starch. And these fibrous stems have a protein content that's not terrible if we prepare them right. She held up something that looked disturbingly like a small animal corpse. This is actually a tuber, not fauna. The mimicry is fascinating. Kael'thas watched her work with growing unease that had nothing to do with toxicity and everything to do with the implications. You're creating a meal plan. Well, yeah. We're here for at least 4 more days. Can't just feed them the same thing over and over. That's how you get nutrient deficiencies. She started a new pot of water boiling. I'm thinking we do the purple tubers for breakfast, these starchy bulbs for midday. And if I can figure out how to process these stems properly, that's dinner with actual protein. Vex'kari cubs require 2.3 kilograms of animal protein daily. Vex'kari cubs with access to prey require that, yeah. She began peeling the bulbs with quick, practiced motions. But metabolism is adaptive, especially in juveniles. Their bodies are figuring out how to extract nutrients from what's available. It's basic survival biology. That's not how Vex'kari biology works. Commander, respectfully, I don't think anyone has ever actually tested how Vex'kari biology works when there's no meat available. She paused in her peeling. Think about it. Your species conquered 40 systems. When have your people ever faced genuine scarcity? Not rationing, not tactical food limitation. Actual, there is no appropriate food available scarcity? The question struck him silent. The Vex'kari had evolved as apex predators. They'd never been prey, never been desperate. Even their most ancient myths involved abundant hunts and glorious kills. They'd never needed to eat anything else, so they'd never learned if they could. The stems need about 2 hours of slow cooking, Amelia continued. So I'll start those now. Bulbs are faster. She glanced at the cubs. Hey, Xilax, want to learn which plants are safe to dig up? The cub abandoned his game immediately and bounded over. Within minutes, the human was teaching a predator cub the difference between safe toxic and dangerous toxic roots, using terms that made Kael'thas's head ache, but that Xilax seemed to grasp intuitively. See the purple stems? Amelia pointed. Those are okay. The ones with purple and green stripes? Those will absolutely kill you. Color patterns matter. Xilax sniffed both plants, his nostrils flaring as he cataloged the scent difference. Then he carefully dug up a purple-stemmed plant with his claws and carried it back to Amelia like a prize. Perfect. Good job identifying the safe one. She accepted it and showed him how to check the root structure. See how this branches? That's another sign it's the right kind. By the time the midday meal was ready, all three cubs could identify two different edible plants and had learned that digging near the water required careful attention to ground stability. Kael'thas contacted command, or tried to. The communications relay was partially functional, enough for text transmission, not voice or visual. He typed out his situation report with mounting dread. Crash, landing, quarantine world, XR847. 3 cubs in my care. All protein rations destroyed. Human survivor, feeding cubs, vegetation. No immediate toxicity observed. Require emergency nutritional guidance. The response took 40 minutes to arrive. When it did, Kael'thas read it 3 times to ensure he'd understood correctly. Impossible. Vex'kari cannot metabolize plant proteins. Cease immediately. Connect with species nutritionist Vex'kari for emergency protocols. He relayed the connection request and settled in to wait, watching the cubs enthusiastically consume boiled bulbs that smelled vaguely of sulfur and minerals. Vex'kari's text response arrived an hour later. Describe cub's current condition. Include bioscan data. Kael'thas attached the last 24 hours of continuous monitoring. Heart rates, digestive activity, neural function, immune response, everything his scanner could track. Bioscans must be corrupted. Data shows perfect health on plant-based diet. Recalibrate and resend. He recalibrated, then calibrated against his own biosigns to ensure the device was functioning. Then scanned the cubs again. The results were identical. Calibration confirms device functioning correctly. Cubs' vitals stable. Digestive. Systems processing vegetation without distress. Human botanist using heat and preparation techniques to reduce toxicity. The response took longer this time. Kael'thas imagined Vex'kari consulting references, checking databases, possibly questioning her entire understanding of their species' biology. This violates fundamental nutritional science. Vex'kari lack necessary enzymes for plant protein processing. Cubs should be experiencing organ failure. Cease experimental diet immediately. Return to species-appropriate nutrition. Kael'thas typed slowly. No species-appropriate nutrition available. All protein sources destroyed. Planet's fauna toxic to Vex'kari biology. Starvation is alternative to current diet. A very long pause. Then, transmit humans' preparation methods. Will attempt to model digestive outcomes. He looked up to find Amelia watching him with knowing eyes. Let me guess. The expert says it's impossible? Among other things. Want me to write up my process? Might help them understand what I'm actually doing here. She didn't wait for an answer, just pulled out her datapad and began typing. I'm used to this, honestly. Spent half my career arguing with people who insisted X planet had no edible flora because the preliminary survey said so. Then I'd show up and find 17 different food sources they'd missed. She worked while the cubs napped again, their bellies full of impossible food. Her report was concise but detailed. Heat application temperatures, soaking durations, which compounds were neutralized versus extracted. How combining multiple plant sources created complete amino acid profiles. Kael'thas transmitted it and received an acknowledgement. Then nothing for 3 hours. When Vex'kari's response finally came, it was a single line. Analyzing. Do not discontinue diet. Monitoring. Day 3 began with Azila waking Amelia before dawn by dropping a purple tuber on her stomach. "Good morning to you too," the human muttered, then stopped. "Wait, Azila, where did you find this?" The cub chirped proudly and gestured with her snout toward the marsh. "You went foraging by yourself?" Amelia sat up quickly, checking the cub over. "Okay, first, that's dangerous and you shouldn't wander off alone. Second," she examined the tuber with professional focus, "this is the right type. Good color, good size, no damage. Did you remember to check for the stripe pattern?" Azila's affirmative chirp was unmistakable. Kael'thas emerged from his shelter to find the human teaching a predator cub about proper foraging safety protocols while praising her initiative. The cognitive dissonance made his head hurt. By mid-morning, all 3 cubs were participating in food gathering under Amelia's supervision. Xilax proved adept at identifying plants by scent. Rahil, despite being the youngest, had the best spatial memory and could return to productive foraging sites without guidance. Azila displayed unexpected patience for the slow work of digging and carefully cleaning roots. They were learning skills no Vex'kari had ever needed to possess. "Commander, can you look at something?" Amelia called. She was examining a stand of tall plants with reddish stems. "These match a description in my database for a different world. But I want confirmation before I risk them. Your pattern recognition is better than mine." He joined her, noting that the cubs had automatically taken up protective positions, not guarding her from him anymore, but forming a perimeter to watch for environmental threats while the adults examined plants. Pack behavior, but with a human as part of the pack. "The database match is 73%, Amelia was saying, which is high enough that the biochemistry is probably similar. But that 27% could be the difference between edible after processing and will absolutely kill you. What do you think? Worth testing on a small sample?" Kael'thas studied the plants and then consulted his own scanner. The compound analysis shows 3 alkaloids matching known toxins, but concentrations are low. If your preparation methods work as described, then these could be our first protein-rich food source that isn't just trace amounts. She made the decision. "Okay, small test batch. I'll try a tiny amount first, wait 2 hours, then we'll know if it's safe for the cubs." "You're going to poison yourself experimentally?" "It's called field testing, and yes, that's how botanical surveys work." She began carefully harvesting a few stems. "Don't worry, I've done this hundreds of times. I'm very good at not dying." The stems required extensive processing, careful peeling to remove the outer toxic layer, then 3 separate boiling sessions with water changes. The result was fibrous and mineral-scented, but when Amelia tested a small piece, she didn't immediately collapse. 2 hours later, she pronounced them safe and prepared a small portion for each cub as a supplement to their usual meal. Kael'thas's comm chimed with an incoming transmission. Vex'ia again, receiving daily bioscan data. Cubs showing unprecedented gut flora diversification. Enzyme production not documented in species literature. Request detailed food logs and continued monitoring. This is now priority research inquiry. He showed Amelia the message. "Huh," she said, looking pleased. "So their digestive systems are adapting. Makes sense. Juvenile biology is plastic, designed to handle environmental variation. Their gut bacteria are probably evolving in real time to handle the new food sources." She paused. "That's actually really cool. Your species might be way more adaptable than anyone realized. Or you're conducting an uncontrolled biological experiment on children." "Commander, with respect, Everything about survival is an uncontrolled experiment. You adapt or you die. These cubs are adapting. She watched Xilax carefully divide his stem portion into smaller bites, eating slowly as she taught him. They're going to be fine. Better than fine. They're learning skills that might save their lives someday. Day 4 brought the first real test. Arhill refused his breakfast. Amelia immediately checked him over, while Kael'thas activated medical protocols, certain the toxicity had finally manifested. But Arhill wasn't sick. He kept pushing the purple tubers away and chirping plaintively at the leftover stems from yesterday. "Oh," Amelia said, and laughed. "You like the stems better. You want those instead of the tubers." Rahil's enthusiastic agreement was obvious. "Sorry, buddy, we're saving those for dinner. They take too long to prepare for breakfast." She considered, "But how about we try the bulbs instead? You liked those yesterday?" The cub accepted this compromise, and Kael'thas realized with a start that he'd just witnessed a Vex'kari juvenile express food preferences for vegetables. Not just eating vegetation to survive, actually developing taste preferences, requesting specific plants. His comm chimed again. This time it wasn't Vexia, but command directly. "Rescue ship arrives, 18 hours. Medical team prepared for emergency intervention. Cubs will undergo full examination and species-appropriate nutritional restoration." He should have felt relieved. Instead, he looked at the 3 cubs teaching each other which roots were crunchy good versus bitter bad, and felt something unexpected. Pride. They'd survived. Against all biological probability, against every regulation and protocol, they'd survived because a human refused to accept that the situation was impossible. "Rescue tomorrow," he told Amelia. "Good timing. I'm running out of new plants to test." She was already planning the day's meals. "We should probably prepare them for the transition back to meat. Don't want to shock their systems." "You're worried about shocking their systems? After 4 days of feeding them poison?" "Commander, I've never once fed them poison. I've fed them carefully prepared nutrition from non-traditional sources." She smiled. "There's a difference. Poison kills you. Food keeps you alive. These cubs are very much alive." He couldn't argue with that. The rescue ship arrived 16 hours later, ahead of schedule. The medical team emerged with scanning equipment and urgent expressions, ready to treat 3 critically malnourished cubs. Instead, they found 3 healthy juveniles demonstrating their foraging skills for a very impressed commander and 1 bemused human botanist. Vexia herself had come on the rescue ship. She scanned the cubs 3 times, checked Kael'thas's equipment for malfunctions, then stood in silence while Azila carefully explained the difference between safe and dangerous root types, using a series of chirps and physical demonstrations. "This is impossible," Vexia said finally. "Yeah, we established that on day 1, Amelia replied. And yet, their gut flora has completely restructured. They're producing enzymes that don't exist in adult Vex'kari. Their digestive efficiency has increased by 34% over baseline." Vexia looked at Amelia with something approaching awe. "How did you know this would work?" "I didn't. But the alternative was watching them starve, so I tried." Amelia shrugged. Field botany isn't about certainty. It's about observation, testing, and adaptation. The cubs did most of the work. Their biology figured out how to process the food. I just made sure the food was processable. Vexia began recording detailed notes, asking rapid questions about preparation techniques, processing times, plant identification markers. Her medical team was collecting samples of everything: the plants, the cub's digestive biome, the water used for processing. This changes our entire understanding of Vex'kari nutritional flexibility, Vex'ia said. Emergency survival protocols will need complete revision. Long-range vessel supplies will need to account for possibility of extended periods without meat access. She looked at Kael'thas. This needs to be mandatory training for all personnel responsible for cubs. I'll recommend it in my report, he said. I'm not asking for a recommendation. I'm establishing it as a medical requirement. Vex'ia turned back to Amelia. Would you be willing to consult on developing the training protocols? We need expert guidance on emergency foraging techniques. I've got another survey assignment starting in 2 weeks, but I can send you my complete field notes and methodology documentation. Amelia was already transferring files. The key is understanding that toxic isn't binary. Most organic compounds can be processed somehow. It's just a question of finding the right technique. The rescue team began packing up the camp, preparing for departure. The cubs stayed close to Amelia, occasionally bringing her interesting plants they'd found for her collection. They're going to miss you, Kael'thas observed. I'll miss them too. They're good students. She crouched down to cub eye level. You three keep practicing your foraging, okay? You never know when it might be useful. Xilax chirped something that sounded like a promise. Raheel pressed his massive head against her shoulder in what was unmistakably affection. Azila dropped one more perfect purple tuber at her feet as a parting gift. Amelia picked up the tuber, examined it with theatrical seriousness, and pronounced it absolutely perfect specimen, A+ work. The cub practically glowed with pride. On the rescue ship, Kael'thas filed his official report while the medical team fussed over the cubs. The report was going to create chaos in multiple departments: biology, nutrition, survival training, emergency protocols. Everything the Vex'kari thought they knew about their species' dietary limitations was being challenged by 3 cubs who'd learned to eat vegetables. He found Amelia in the ship's small botanical lab, already processing samples from the planet for her survey records. Thank you, he said simply. For what? Doing my job? But she smiled. You're welcome, Commander. For what it's worth, you adapted pretty well yourself. Not everyone can handle having their entire worldview challenged by root vegetables. The cubs adapted. I simply stopped interfering. That's harder than it sounds. Knowing when to trust someone else's expertise, even when it contradicts your training? She sealed a sample container. That takes real leadership. Kael'thas considered this. Considered the cubs, healthy and curious and equipped with impossible skills. Considered the human who'd refused to accept that survival was impossible just because the database said so. What's your next assignment? He asked. Botanical survey of Kepler 442b. Newly open to colonization, completely unexplored biosphere, probably a dozen things that want to kill me. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Should be fascinating. And if you find yourself stranded with no food sources again? Then I'll figure it out. That's what I do. She glanced at him curiously. Why? Because I suspect my report is going to result in policy changes, emergency foraging protocols, botanical specialists assigned to long-range missions, survival training that includes plant-based nutrition. He allowed himself something that might have been satisfaction. Your fieldwork just became very relevant to Vex'kari military doctrine. Huh. Never thought I'd influence alien military policy by teaching cubs to eat their vegetables. She laughed. My supervisor is going to love this. What did you do on your last survey, Moore? Oh, just revolutionized Vex'kari nutritional science. the usual. From the medical bay came the sound of cubs enthusiastically explaining foraging techniques to increasingly overwhelmed researchers. Azila was apparently giving a lecture on root identification. Rahil was demonstrating proper digging technique. Zelax was trying to organize them both into a coherent presentation. They weren't traumatized survivors of a crash. They were students proudly sharing what they'd learned. Amelia collected her samples and prepared to return to her assigned quarters, already thinking ahead to her next survey. Kael'thas returned to writing his report, already imagining the bureaucratic chaos it would cause. Behind them, 3 Vex'kari cubs continued teaching doctors about vegetables, completely unaware that they'd just rewritten their species survival manual. And in a small corner of the ship's database, Amelia Moore's field notes were being copied, distributed, and studied by experts who were slowly realizing that sometimes the most important survival skill wasn't knowing what was possible. It was refusing to accept what wasn't.